For what feels like forever, the United States and Iran have been caught in this loop of hostility and suspicion. It's a complicated story full of coups, revolutions, and deals that just fell apart. And it's really shaped the entire modern Middle East. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? So why do these two countries still not trust each other? I mean, at its core, this whole thing isn't really just about politics or who has more power. It's about trust, or maybe more accurately, a complete and total lack of it, built up over decades. And to really get why, we've got to rewind the clock and look at the exact moments that just completely shattered their relationship. All right, let's talk about the breaking points. Look, the hostility we see today didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was really forged in a handful of key moments, flashpoints really, that created this legacy of resentment that's still so potent today. Yeah, there are three major moments in the 20th century that pretty much define this whole breakdown. It all kicks off in 1953 with a coup backed by the US. This event, well, it directly planted the seeds for what would happen later, the 1979 revolution that got rid of the leader America supported. And that revolution, it led straight into the hostage crisis, which was the final straw. It just severed all ties and left these wounds that honestly have never really healed. Okay, so let's start right here, 1953. This is where it all begins. The CIA was involved in a coup to oust Iran's democratically elected leader and put the pro-American Shah in power instead. For so many Iranians, this was the original sin. It was this foreign intervention that created this deep, burning resentment against the US that has lasted for generations. And then, for Americans, the whole conflict got boiled down to just one number, a number that would be absolutely seared into the country's memory: 444. 444 days. That is how long American diplomats and citizens were held hostage when Iranian students took over the US embassy in Tehran back in '79. I mean, this event completely blew up any diplomatic ties and just cemented this image of Iran as a hostile adversary right into the American psyche. Okay, let's jump forward a few decades. A huge effort was finally made to try and bridge this massive divide, and it was all centered around Iran's nuclear program. But as you're about to see, this deal, it ended up being just as controversial and divisive as all the conflicts that came before it. The official name was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA for short. You've probably heard it called the Iran nuclear deal. The basic idea was pretty straightforward. Iran would agree to really strict limits on its nuclear program, and in exchange, the world would lift these absolutely crippling economic sanctions. And here's where it gets really interesting, because you see this total split in how people saw it. On one side, supporters were hailing it as this huge diplomatic victory, the thing that would stop Iran from getting a bomb. But on the other side, opponents in the US thought it was a terrible, deeply flawed agreement. They argued it was just too weak, that it didn't go nearly far enough, and gave up sanctions relief way too easily. This quote right here just perfectly sums up the opposition. It's from Mike Pompeo, who was a congressman at the time, back in 2016. It shows you that for some critics, the real goal wasn't just about stopping a nuclear program. No, it was about fundamentally changing the Iranian regime itself. So from that point of view, any kind of diplomacy just looked like giving in. So with that kind of deep-seated opposition, it's maybe not surprising what happened next. The whole diplomatic approach was eventually tossed aside completely, in favor of something much, much more confrontational. And then, in May 2018, it became official. The Trump administration unilaterally pulled the US right out of the JCPOA. It was a move that absolutely shocked America's international partners, and, well, it set the stage for a brand new, very tense era of conflict. This kicked off what was called the maximum pressure campaign. We're not just talking about reimposing sanctions here. The US brought back the absolute harshest economic penalties you can imagine. Now, the stated goal was to force Iran back to the table to negotiate a better, more restrictive deal. But a lot of critics saw it differently. To them, it looked a whole lot like an implicit policy of regime change, aimed at just destabilizing the Iranian government. Things got really, really tense. The campaign hit its most dangerous peak in January 2020. A US drone strike killed Major General Qasem Soleimani, who was arguably Iran's most powerful and important security official. This was, without a doubt, the most aggressive move yet, and it brought the US and Iran closer to a full-blown war than they had been in decades. And this quote from President Trump really gets to the heart of the philosophy behind that strike. The argument was basically this: look, years of talking have gotten us nowhere. In their view, the only thing that could actually stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon wasn't more words, it was direct, decisive action. So, okay, after all this history, the coups, the revolutions, the broken deals, where do things stand today between the US and Iran? The simple answer is the future is incredibly fragile, and the stakes, they honestly could not be higher. And that really brings us right to the heart of the problem. You know, at this point, it's not really about the technical details of centrifuges or the specifics of sanctions. The real issue is the total and complete breakdown of trust. It's this deep, gut-level belief on both sides that the other side will always go back on their word. And that leads to a really dangerous paradox, right? All of this pressure, this maximum pressure campaign, was designed to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But what if it actually did the opposite? What if it convinced Iran's leaders that having a nuclear weapon is the only thing that can truly guarantee their survival and stop future attacks? So, what happens now? Where do we go from here? Well, according to strategic analysts at CSIS, there are basically 3 ways this could go. 3 off-ramps, they call them. Option 1, the military option, a super high-risk move to try and destroy Iran's nuclear sites. Option 2, diplomacy. Get back to the negotiating table and hammer out an even stronger, more verifiable deal. And then there's option 3, the so-called fig leaf option, which is basically just declare victory, say the problem is solved to save face, and just hope for the best, even if it means risking a secret program. And what if none of those paths work out? Well, the most likely result is just more of the same, a continuation of what we've been seeing for over 40 years now, this incredibly volatile, dangerous cycle of conflict, where any little spark could set off a massive fire. And that brings us right back to the question we started with. After this long, painful history of interventions, revolutions, and broken promises, the legacy of mistrust is crystal clear. The real question now is there any path back from that? Can these 2 countries ever actually escape their past? Or are they just trapped in a conflict that has no end in sight?